The title of this book, The Border, that's a loaded title,
Yeah.
especially in our political landscape today. Why? What's behind that?
You know, it's the third in a trilogy about the Mexican-American drug trade. So the border naturally figures into that. It's an important aspect. But also the border refers to other kinds of borders other than just the physical border between our two countries. It refers to ethical borders, to moral borders, to emotional borders, and whether if we cross them, can we ever cross back?
Okay. And, the book is the conclusion of a trilogy. There was The Cartel, there was The Power of the Dogs, all of them cartel thrillers about that war on drugs that you mentioned. What inspired you to write about this?
It's not a happy story, really. Back in September of 1998, there were 19 innocent men, women, and children slaughtered in a little town in Baja, not very far from here. And I couldn't get my head wrapped around how that could happen, how any phenomena could get to that point. So I started researching, and now, 20 years down the line, here we are.
And how much research did it take? I mean, each story is packed with so much detail and parallels a lot of truth. How did you research for these books? It seems like you have to do a lot of digging for this.
How long do you have? The first book took me 5.5 to 6 years to research and write. And so it was a matter of reading a lot of history, a lot of journalism, a lot of court documents and government papers, but then getting out on the scene, talking to people from all aspects of this thing.
Right, I was going to ask, who did you shadow for this?
I didn't shadow anyone particularly, but I talked to a lot of people. I sat down like we're talking, obviously without cameras and microphones, but a lot of conversations, a lot of time spent on the border in various places in Mexico and elsewhere, and
Okay. And the detail in your writing, again, parallels everything. Tell me about the main character, Art Keller, and how he's developed into this storyline in the border.
Art Keller, we meet him in the first book, The Power of the Dog, as an idealistic young DEA agent in Mexico, a true believer in the war on drugs. By the time we meet him in the second book, not so idealistic and certainly not so young. He's become cynical, kind of jaded. We meet him in this book, The Border, the third book. He's become the head of DEA, specifically charged with doing something about the heroin epidemic. And he realizes that the problems are greater here at home than they are down in Mexico.
And the New York Times review of your book said the words used around race and gender are ugly in these times, and it calls for a warning. Why did you choose to sort of add that layer to your storytelling?
I didn't add that layer, so to speak, Jade. It's there. I write about the world as I see it. I write about the world as I find it. And so when you do that, you have to make a kind of a tough choice. The choice is between sanitizing it, which makes it kind of more acceptable and in some ways easier to read, or looking at it realistically and directly, which makes it tougher to read and yet presents a more realistic picture. I made the latter choice.
In talking about the title of the book and the political landscape, how did you factor in the Trump administration's view of the border and building of a wall?
Well, look, in terms of drugs, and this is what Art Keller has to deal with, and therefore I have to deal with it, the building of this proposed wall will do absolutely nothing. And I wish we could all be very clear on this because the reasons are so obvious. We've all been there. We live in San Diego. We know the wall has gates. The one in San Diego is the busiest commercial border crossing in the Western Hemisphere. DEA tells us, and the traffickers tell us, that 90% plus of the illicit drugs that come up from the Mexican border come through those gates in tractor-trailer trucks or private vehicles. So the wall won't do a thing to stop the flow of those drugs.
Don Winslow, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much.